bone-crunching action, high-flying martial arts, dumbass dialogue. We are talking Bangkok Dog that stars D.Y. Sao and Brian Lee. This is a 2024 action movie, and the story is going to sound a little weird. I'm going to try and put this in a kind of little log line for you, and then I'll explain. But can you imagine Donnie Brasco meets The Raid? Let me explain. So the plot is somewhat similar to the idea of Donnie Brasco, but it kind of has like the highs of the action like The Raid does. So the story focuses on this kind of Interpol style crime agency. It's not called that, it's called something, they've made up a name. But basically it's Interpol. And we have this agent who is, you know, a high-flying martial artist played by D.Y. Sao. And he's a bit of a rogue agent, you know, he sort of does things his way. And he ends up taking down this sort of drug dealer, human trafficker. But this guy, this criminal who he's taken down, played by Brian Lee, is actually connected to a much larger crime boss in Bangkok. So D.Y. Sao actually kind of poses as this this criminal that they've captured to gain access to this kind of criminal organisation. So he goes out to Bangkok and sort of becomes part of this sort of organisation undercover. At the same time, he actually ends up striking quite a good friendship with kind of like a middle management type guy in this kind of organisation, a criminal. But they have this kind of natural bond, and D.Y. Sao's character kind of gets drawn in a little bit to the lifestyle of kind of partying and kind of the riches that kind of the crime life can offer, and maybe gets a little bit too deep undercover. He ends up kind of cutting people's fingers off to get information and things like this, and his partner ends up coming out to kind of Bangkok to try and you know, ultimately getting back on the straight and narrow. All of this time there is many kind of like fight scenes, and let me tell you, as I say, The Raid is often cited as one of the kind of the best martial arts movies. This one obviously a lower budget movie, not as high profile, but boy, there was some impressive martial arts on display here. But this movie has very much like peaks and troughs. There's some things that I think are really good, and there's some things that I think this movie really does suffer from. So let's go through it. What works in this movie's favour? Let's go over the good stuff first. The martial arts. It's very, very impressive. And again, we have to bear in mind this is a lower budget movie. This doesn't have the production to be able to do loads of different kind of takes and things like that. But boy, this was impressive stuff. I know D.Y. Sao is a very accomplished martial artist, as are, you know, his co-stars. But like the final fights in this movie, they are like whoa. They're really, really good. I mean, very, very well choreographed, very well performed. They look like they're hitting. It doesn't look like there's too much kind of like wire work and stuff and sort of grease. I mean, I know there is, but it's done in a way where I feel it's kind of a little bit hyper reality, but it doesn't really look too out there. I think one of the problems I have sometimes with a lot of kind of martial art movies is that the kind of the wire work is so obvious, and sometimes it doesn't even try to hide it. But this one I didn't find it at all. It's just very much like feels very kind of elaborate fight scenes, but very, very impressive. And as the film goes on, I mean, we get plenty of them, but I have to say I think they actually get more impressive as the kind of the film goes on. The final kind of sequence, which I won't spoil what happens, but ultimately there's a series of kind of fights, and they are very, very, very impressive. So there's that. The other thing I think, there is actually some quite good character work here, believe it or not, despite what I'm going to say about some other aspects of the kind of the performances. But two stood out to me. Brian Lee, who plays the kind of the initial bad guy that they come across, and who is kind of, he pops up again later on in the movie. Very impressive martial artist, but also very charismatic. I thought his character was this kind of like this cocky sort of criminal who's himself a little bit of a rogue, and even with his own sort of like crime bosses, he's a bit of a sort of talkbacker and things. But I thought he came across as sort of like a very charismatic character, and kind of like, you know, he's the sort of guy that sort of taunts his opponents and things like this. And I just thought his character was really stood out, to be honest. There's quite a few like henchmen that get bad guys that kind of get names, and some of them are a little generic. Impressive fights, but generic characters, and even the big crime boss, bit generic. But this guy, I thought his character oozed charisma. I thought he was very, very memorable. And then we also have this kind of friendship between D.Y. Sal's character and his kind of criminal buddy that he ends up kind of pairing up with whilst he's in Bangkok. And I just really thought their interplay seemed like genuine kind of friends. Their language and the way they are kind of talking, you know, you get the impression, or you believe, that the character that D.Y. Sal is playing, this undercover Interpol agent, really does strike up a friendship with this guy, and kind of ultimately wants to try and get him out of the life and try and almost sort of save him. But at the same time, he's enjoying the kind of the lifestyle a little bit kind of too much. I do think they could have done more with that. They could have delved further into the kind of the relationship and make it a little bit more dramatic in regards to D.Y. Sal's character's kind of, you know, temptation to the dark side, so to speak. But it's only kind of really touched upon, but at least it was there. So, you know, I kind of really enjoyed those moments. Now, if you like your action, this is a double-edged sword, and I'm going to come on to this again, but if you like your action movies somewhat kind of uncomplicated and maybe a little bit on the kind of like the sillier side, this is a very uncomplicated movie. The kind of the plot is kind of cartoonish, to be honest with you, but at the same time that kind of makes it have a degree of silly fun in a way. And I'll kind of go into the negative side of that in a little bit. But yeah, the movie's not exactly trying to portray a realistic depiction of an Interpol agent, for example. But at the same time, it's kind of like a fun comic booky kind of style feel to it. The movie's relatively kind of well shot and put together and stuff. And like I say, I think certainly where we have our fight scenes, you know, I was very impressed with like the cinematography and the way that they've incorporated some kind of like subtle, more fantastical ideas in regards to the way these people are fighting and they're reacting and stuff. But it's subtle and it doesn't it kind of, you'd be forgiven for thinking it's just two people fighting without any assistance or anything like that. But it's very, very well kind of put together in that aspect. The movie does have some funny moments. As I said, there's these little touches here and there. The movie is not like an action comedy per se, but there are a few like humorous touches. And I've mentioned the kind of the Brian Lee character. The way he's just kind of somewhat sort of flamboyant, which just makes him a kind of like quite an amusing character. But there's a few kind of like sillier moments that don't go overboard with the humour, but I think just make it like, you know, amusing enough that you kind of enjoy it. So there's that. So I think what this movie does well, it does very well. But what does it not do well? Well, I've kind of alluded to it. So one of the negatives of this movie is the acting, the dialogue is quite on the lower end of the scale, shall we say. The acting, let's start with that. The worst offenders here are some of the smaller parts. I don't want to point out necessarily particular actors, but there are some kind of supporting roles here that are like, oh god, just not good. Like pretty bad performances. You'll probably know when you see it who I'm talking about, but there's a few, and yeah, the acting just isn't good with some of these people. Second thing is the kind of the actual written dialogue that these characters are saying. Now, for example, D.Y. Sal's character, I'm not saying he's kind of actor-worthy acting, but he was fine. I thought he was fine in the role, and I liked him with his character work. But some of the actual dialogue that that is written. Oh God, it's kind of somewhat cringe-inducing at times. So there's that. And then we have to look at just the kind of like the silliness side of the movie. As I said, it makes it kind of fun, but at the same time you're thinking, oh man, it's just a little bit too goofy. For example, we have our opening scene. Our opening scene is this kind of Brian Lee's character, who's this kind of criminal. You know, he's at the dock taking a shipment of drugs and human trafficking and stuff. And he's got this gang of like henchmen, and they're all dressed up with like the village people, and it's just like, oh my God, why are they looking like that? And one's got like a headband, and I'm thinking, what is this meant to be the 80s? And then we have like just 2 Interpol agents come and take these guys down, and then they don't try and like arrest anyone. They just beat them up like one by one. I'm thinking, well, there's not even an attempt here to try and like catch anyone really until you get right to the end. And it's just like, why wouldn't you call for backup? Why wouldn't you use firearms? And I guess it wants to have a fun sequence with lots of kind of like fight sequences, but it just doesn't kind of like make sense. And that's just that's the opening scene. But all throughout the movie, there's just sillier moments where you're thinking, come on. For example, we have this female partner of D.Y. Sale gets captured, and they've literally just put like a sock in her mouth to gag her, and she could literally just go, poof. But she doesn't. You know, it's not like bounding. It's literally just put in her mouth, and she's just there with this like rag in her mouth, and again you could just go, and that would be it. It's just so stupid. So this movie really is the action side of it is great. This looks like the director definitely wants to focus on like the action and that kind of like the martial arts and the choreography and stuff like that, and I get it, that looks great, but the story around it, as I say, it's kind of similar to Donnie Brasco, but it's nowhere in like that kind of dramatic, if that makes sense. So it's a very goofy production in regards to its narrative, its acting, its kind of dialogue and things like that. But it's buoyed by some really strong martial arts action. And I have to say, even though I thought the acting was not good, some of the characters I still found very kind of compelling and kind of likeable, I have to say, despite its kind of flaws. Maybe I watched too many B movies, I don't know. So it makes this movie like somewhat hard to rate, because like this really does have highs and lows. So where do you put it? Now, I guess if I'm thinking, how much did I enjoy? How much was I engaged with this movie? Was this like an over or under average level of engagement that I was kind of interested in? And I probably was quite engaged. So I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10, because I do feel, despite some serious flaws, this movie still has a good amount of entertainment value, especially if you're a fan of martial arts. But don't be expecting high drama here, people, because you're not going to get it. Despite my kind of saying it's a little like Donnie Brasco. Anyway, so it's a 6 out of 10. I kind of had fun with it, but yeah, go in with open eyes. Would you watch it based on what I've told you? Please do let me know what your thoughts are, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.